So first of all, you need, of course, planning. And the goal at this stage is just to ensure that the end product is actually feasible, that it actually can be made, and that we are sure of which features are required in the end product. So before we go into planning, we make sure that we have a list of all the features that we actually need to get in the end product. The next stage is known as analysis. Now, this phase involves managing stakeholders and users to finalize all the business requirements. Design means that the system and the software design is starting to be prepared in its basic form. And we start here the implementation of coding. So this is the core area of activity where code creation actually takes place. Once you've created those little pieces of code, of course, the next phase is testing. So of course, each piece of code is tested in its own right, and that's known as unit testing. But once you've done that, you need to join those units of code together, and that is known as integration testing. And once you've got all of those together, you will test the final product. Once you're fairly confident as a team that the units of code, those little pieces of code, are working well together, you can think about deployment. And here is where the product is finalized and delivered to the end user. The end user will then give you feedback on any problems, and this will lead to continual testing again. So methodologies that fall under Agile are things like Scrum, of course. Now, Scrum is a subset of Agile. It has a slight variation on other methodologies, but it is one of the most popular methods out there. The methods I'm going to mention here all work pretty much in the same way, with a slight tune and an inclination towards their own tendencies. However, in general, what you need to remember as a recruiter is that all of these fall pretty much under the Agile banner and work in the way that I've just described. Teams of developers working together, interacting with the user, creating small increments of code, and more cyclical rather than a sequential one-directional approach. So we have Scrum, we have extreme programming, that's another Agile method, and out of there will fall another term that you'll see on CVs called pair programming, which really is what it sounds like, having two developers sitting next to each other and actually bouncing ideas off of each other to move their code forward, rather than having individual developers. You'll see terms like TDD, BDD, and FDD. Now, the DD means driven development. So TDD is test-driven development. BDD is behavior-driven development. And FDD is functional-driven development. And so all of those, again, we don't really want to go into the academic reasons at this stage as to how they're different from each other, but for you to know that if somebody's giving you these on a job spec, they're working in an iterative, agile environment rather than a structured environment like project. An older method is DSDM, or Dynamic Systems Development Methodology. That still comes up on CVs. ASD, or Adaptive Systems Development, is also there. Lean SD and Kanban are also Agile approaches. And finally, crystal clear or rational, or RUP, are also Agile approaches. So that's all you really need to know. If you see any of these on job specs, you know that these people are looking for people who can work in a team environment. And by the way, in all of these environments, the life cycle is very small. It's going to be a 6-month cycle, a 3-month cycle. These situations are never 4-year projects, 2-year projects like Project Lifecycle. They are created within a time box, what they call a time box, and the time box is king. So essentially, when they set up a time box, everything else can vary, but the time box of, let's say, 6 months, well, you've got to get that product out in 6 months. 3 months, it's got to be in 3 months. And so that date never changes. And actually, that date never changes for a practical reason. It could be this Christmas. So for example, we need this new model of a phone before the Christmas boom takes off. It could be an Apple or a Samsung conference, and so you have to get that product out by then. Note one thing, all of these methods are driven by a date rather than maybe quality, and so time is essential here. So those were just some of the methodologies that imply your clients don't want to be stuck with a rigid project approach. Now, let's go in and look at some of the terms that you're going to see associated with the Scrum environment.